when we're coming into a stubble scenario is our actual boom height. So the way these booms are set up, so they're 50 centimetre spacings, 110 degree angle fans, and to get even deposition at your target, we need a double overlap. So what that means is the fan from this nozzle and this nozzle will intersect down here, and you've got this nozzle over the top, so you've got a double overlap, and that happens at 50 for the 50 centimetre spacings at 110 degrees. That happens at 50 centimetres below the nozzle. So that's where you want your boom to be at least 50 centimetres above your target. So probably set up at 60 centimetres as a bit of a rough guide to give yourself some fat. Where that changes in the stubble system, if we pretend that this bit of ryegrass here is our stubble, all of a sudden we've got a false target. So if we've got spray coming this way, it's going to intercept this pretend stubble, and it's not going to make it down to the target. So we want our double overlap to, come into effect before we get to the top of the stubble. So when we're going out in a paddock, and whether it be stubble or a chickpea crop like this that we want to put a fungicide out on, we need to take the rig out on top of that and then go 60 centimetres up from there. So we've still got double overlap happening before we get to the top of your stubble or your chickpea crop. The next one is, spraying direction in stubble. We don't have, it's a bit harder to see into the chickpea crop with the rows, but you can imagine if we're spraying this way across this chickpea crop, all our spray droplets see, and all you can see is the crop, and they're just going to really intercept. You can't see any bare ground, and you're going to get a lot of interception from your chemical across the crop, which might be great if we're just trying to do an insecticide and we're targeting the top of the canopy, or even with a fungicide. But most of the time we want to get down into the canopy even with those, and if we're looking at weeds, we want to get right down to the ground. So if we're coming along, going with the sowing direction, we've got line of sight to the ground for our droplets, for our nozzles, and we're going to get much better coverage onto the ground. So spray in the same direction that you sowed. Just keep an eye out on your headlands. Obviously most of your sowing rigs are going to be probably half the width of your spray rig, so you can't avoid that for that first lap, or if you're setting up your AB lines on the big rigs. But if you're doing 2 laps with the sowing rig, don't go and do 2 laps around with your spray rig, because that second lap you're going to be going, getting basically a whole width of your rig going across the sowing pattern on either end, and you get a lot of interception in the stubble, and that's you'll particularly notice it if you're using soil applied pre-emergent herbicides. So a couple of tips to get our spray down into the target area. The first one is droplet size, and so I've got a couple of different nozzles here just to show, just to try and help me demonstrate how they'll work in different scenarios. And so these are XR02s. We've got a bit of a gust of breeze, but you can imagine this is probably not too dissimilar to what would be happening if I was driving 20 kilometres an hour downwind as well. And you can see they're very susceptible to movement with the wind, and it's taking a long time to kind of wet up the area down the bottom here. So turn that off, it's loud. So you can see, if you have a look at some of the ryegrass here, it'll just coat your stubble, and a large percentage of that spray isn't actually going to get down to the ground where you want it. Once again, you might be able to get away with that in a situation where you're using a fungicide or insecticide and you want to coat all your foliage, in this situation. But in a stubble, weed killing type situation, we want to get as much product down there as possible. So I'll switch a few across here, just on this side. So these are AIXR02s, so 3.5 bar. These will give us pretty much a coarse, just into the coarse droplet. We crank the pressure up to about 4 bar, that creeps into medium. But it onto these and put the other side on just to compare. And you can see straight away we're getting a lot more vertical trajectory of the droplet. So as we're coming into our stubble, we're getting a lot less of this swirling effect out the back, and we're keeping our sort of, I guess, almost direct line. So if we've got a bit of a cross breeze, we're not just coating the stubble line, we're getting a lot more down onto the ground. I guess the biggest difference you see, like with these, you know, fine or even medium droplets compared to like a coarse or extremely coarse, which we'll have a look at here in a minute, is when we put out water sensitive paper in the middle of the plant row, they're basically the same. You know, we're getting very similar coverage as long as we're going down, you know, don't have a strong cross breeze. When we get into the actual stubble line, the plant line, and the weeds that are in amongst there, we see a bit of a drop off with the coarse, and we see the fine. Basically, it's very hard to find fine droplets that have actually made it into that stubble line. They just don't penetrate through the stubble at all. So if you want to take that up another notch, and we're looking at you know, I guess using some products that we normally do over summer, Glide 2,4-D, translocate quite readily through the plant, so coverage isn't as important, we just need to get some on there. Or if we're using, you know, pre-emergent soil applied stuff, that we're not even worried if it sticks on a weed, we just want to get it on the ground. We can crank up our nozzles again. It's only just got enough pressure there, but that's your sort of extra coarse up against your fine. And these guys, I probably need a fraction more pressure, are so big they'll actually get down and start bouncing off your stubble and really penetrating through. So they'll bounce around, they'll splash, they'll rebound, and you can see how wet, you know, the ground starts to get wet very quickly, because they're going nowhere but down where you want them to go. So you do need to be a little bit careful with those guys. Even if you're using a pre-emergent like a Trifleur Abidex, where you want everything on the ground, 9 times out of 10 you're mixing in a Glide or a knockdown type product with that as well, and sometimes targeting a fairly small target. So to compensate, just keep your water rates up. There's plenty of data sort of out there now to show that, you know, these extra coarse nozzles will give you just as good a job as any of the others, as long as you keep your water rate at sort of 80 litres per hectare. You drop down under that, and you know, back down to a 50 or 60 litre per hectare water rate, and the really big droplets can start to drop off a little bit if you're looking at targeting, you know, quite a small target like a 2-leaf ryegrass plant. So that leads in nicely to, I guess, the next aspect. So as far as droplets go in a stubble system, you know, coarse to very coarse, you're not going to be sacrificing anything, and you'll get a much better job. Go to water rates is the next one that I just mentioned. So I guess in a situation where, you know, like we're spraying out on this road where you've got maybe a cultivated paddock that you're coming in and spraying, there's nothing really there to intercept your spray. You can get away with products like Glide and 2,4-D, or even if you're just using Glide, you know, 40 to 50 litres of water per hectare will actually do quite a good job there. You move it over into a stubble system, you know, particularly barley stubbles that can be quite heavy, and all of a sudden we really need to be looking at probably 70 litres of water a hectare to get enough product, you know, the same amount of product down onto our target. So, you know, shift your sort of water rates up when you're going into a stubble retain system to keep your coverage on par. So droplets, water volume, direction, what was the other one? Speed of your rig. So as you can see, like, the droplets are, you know, susceptible to the wind and to movement. So the faster we're going, the more this droplet, you know, even though it's going to come out and start shearing off a little bit, so it'll lose its vertical trajectory. But as you're going, obviously, if we're travelling at 20 kilometres an hour that way, even though the droplet's sort of coming out and going like this, its actual, you know, or trajectory, I guess, is going to be forward on an angle sort of like that. And the faster we go, the more that angle kind of comes up, and it's really going to be pelting along. So if we slow down, particularly with these big guys, to sort of 16, 17 k's an hour, bring that right down to sort of something like this, and we're going to get a lot more product down into through the canopies where we want to go. So if you can, just probably the guys that are doing that 20 to 25 k's an hour, if you can bring it down under 20, you will see a bit of a difference if you're in a good stubble load type scenario. That's pretty much it for the droplets. So so keys are large droplets, higher water rates, slow down and go the same way as your stubble. Make sure you got your height right, and you should be good to go. Actually, on the height, I didn't mention, 60 centimetres is a good sort of a good place to start. Don't go the other extreme, I guess, and go too high. We've got plenty of big self-propelled rigs now that the actual boom can sit really quite high off the ground, and the difference in our drift potential between something that's sort of sitting 60 centimetres versus something that might be sitting at a metre above our target can be anywhere from 4 to 8 times higher drift potential. So we don't really want to go that way either, particularly if we're using knockdown type products that can be getting onto off target, doing a lot of damage. So don't go too high.